It is very bright on set today.
It is.
That's why I got sunglasses on. There'd be no other reason to wear them, would there?
Not really.
No. So, well, no, it's this. I don't think it's necessary to be this bright. It's ridiculous.
Well, I can turn them off if you want, but they won't be able to see us. And there's not really much point in us doing all this. Hello and welcome back to War Mysteries. I'm joined by Matt and his shades, and I'm Jay. In April of 1943, Hitler ordered that the Reich's chief architect Albert Speer and his subordinates initiate a top-secret construction project in the Owl Mountains in Lower Silesia, which at that time was German-occupied territory. Codenamed Der Riese, or the Giant, the plans called for a massive excavation beneath the forests of the Owl Mountains to make way for a sprawling underground complex consisting of 7 enormous sites, linked together by subterranean railways. Overseen by the infamous Hans Kammler, the project advanced at an incredible rate before suddenly coming to a halt just before war's end. The site was quickly abandoned in early 1945 following the approach of the Red Army to the east. But even 80 years later, the full extent of the site is still not known, and even less is understood about its original intended purpose. This is the story of Der Riese, the city beneath the trees. By mid-1943, the tide was turning against Nazi Germany. The Afrika Korps had surrendered by May 7th, and the Battle of Kursk in July would bring an end to Operation Citadel, the German strategic advance into the Kursk salient. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, would eventually force the German military from the island, and extensive bombing of Hamburg toward the end of July would result in a firestorm, destroying U-boat pens, dockyards, and almost half the city's factories, as well as killing over 40,000 civilians. The solution would have seemed clear to Hitler and High Command. The Mittelwerk underground factory, principally responsible for V2 production and the development of other experimental weapons, had been completed in Thuringia in 1943, after persistent Allied bombing had proven above-ground factories to be vulnerable to aerial attacks. Operation Hydra in August of 1943 reinforced this belief. Underground facilities, conversely, offered near invulnerability from bombing, were easily defensible, and could be hidden from the enemy by selecting a remote location, and with the careful use of natural camouflage and terrain. The Owl Mountains were specifically selected for Riese, as the metamorphic composition of the bedrock was especially dense, and would offer near invulnerability to air raids and Allied bombing. This is thought to be the reasoning behind the construction project: the shifting of production, development, or research facilities deep underground and out of range from enemy air weapons. Okay, so have you ever heard of Der Riese?
No.
No. So it's essentially a massive complex that they discovered.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah? What do you know about it?
It's a massive complex that was discovered
Where?
in the Owl Mountains. We mentioned those before, haven't we?
Yeah, about 40 seconds ago. Yeah,
No, I mean in another episode. We've talked about the Owl Mountains.
Oh, yeah, we have done. Our first episode, I believe. Hans Gamler's little disappearance.
There you go then.
Still haven't found him. It's been a while, 5 years.
Still haven't found the planes.
So, enormous underground complex consisting of different sites, some linked by railways, some linked by underground railways. Tens of millions of Reichsmarks dumped into it. Lots and lots of cash.
This is what they discovered this at the end of World War II, did they? After the war.
Yeah, it was. It was known about according to documents that they'd found, but they actually visited a number of times after the war, and basically saw the true extent of the place. Massive.
Who's they?
The occupying forces. So it would have been, the British, the Americans. Canadians.
Okay.
French.
So it all got nicked then.
Well, we'll find out. But, secrets. So at the time, Lower Silesia, which is now part of Poland, was German-occupied territory. Big Week showed the Germans that their factories were really vulnerable, essentially, to firebombing and to penetrating bombs, bunker busters, all that sort of stuff. So they decided, obviously we've got war on two fronts here, let's shift everything to the centre of the empire and find the most easily defensible place that there is, and that's obviously going to be a mountain range, and the only one that was close enough to be viable, really, was the Owl Mountains, which conveniently they had control of.
Let's do the background.
Right, we'll start with a bit of an explanation as to what exactly the Riese was. Located 80 kilometres south of Wrocław, Riese is essentially a massive underground tunnel system. The complex itself consists of 7 underground facilities and structures spread across the Owl Mountains, and by April 1945 had reached its current size, spanning some 9 kilometres of tunnels. None of them were completed, with only 11% of the entire complex reinforced with concrete. Nearly a third of the total known area is now flooded with groundwater. Even now, Riese is considered to be one of the largest and most ambitious military projects ever conceived, and yet very little is known about either its intended use or its total size. The underground system can be accessed from a number of different entrances, most of which were cleverly concealed. The complex conceals many points of interest itself. Abandoned military barracks, bunkers, warehousing and shelving, stockpiled building materials and random iron barricades which can be found strewn throughout the tunnel systems. There are tunnels that lead seemingly into nowhere, vertical shafts that have been excavated for either airflow or access by non-existent elevators, and cavernous halls with high ceilings that extend into the dark. So they still don't actually know if we've discovered it all. They've only found 7 sites where there is above ground access. One was easy because it was right near an enormous labour camp, and had railways, like narrow gauge railways going to it that people discovered. But they're still finding new sites, parts of it, like bunkers, concrete structures.
Even today?
I think the most recent was about 10 years ago.
So not earlier?
No, not earlier. No, not that recently.
And have you been to the Owl Mountains?
I've been to Poland.
That doesn't answer my
So
question.
I've flown over the Owl Mountains. Got you. For once.
All right.
I've actually been there for once.
But did you go in connection with researching this episode?
No.
Are you going to do like a map?
Jesus, what in my eye?
There are 10 of these things.
I thought they were illegal now.
Anti-roll device. It rolls a bit, but in my car, when it's on the hood, it doesn't roll around.
Ingenious.
Wowzer, I never knew that. Heat DVD box is dark blue. I thought it was black. That's it.
Yeah, I can see it. 7 major sites have been discovered. These are Jobon, also known as Ramenberg, Osovka, also known as Sauverhorn, Vlodaj, known as Wolfsburg, Sokolec, or Falkenberg, Rosicka, or Dorfbach, Julkowice, also known as Auersdorf, and Giatz Castle, known in German as Fürstenstein.
So these were after the war. Are we talking, are they people finding this in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s?
After the war, when the German government and the German military was being dismantled, they went through all the documentation, because you know what the Germans are like, they kept records of everything. Like you can find invoices of how much concrete they had, how much wood they ordered, how long it would take to get there, how many metres they expected to get out of it, the weight of everything in short and long tons. They had everything worked out, even the Reichsmark cost. So you can see invoices, a whole lot. And that's how they know that Kammler was involved, because he signed some of them.
Yeah,
so there's a ton of it. And obviously they were meticulous with their records, and obviously all the stuff that wasn't blown up during the war, they managed to get hold of. So the first one is called Sobon, or the Germans called it Ramenberg. 3 access tunnels, 170 metres, 216 metres, 86 metres, one of which is collapsed. Internal tunnels lead off from the main trunks, with 2 access tunnels either side, and loads of half-completed runoffs. Osovka, or Sauferhollen, access tunnel of 120 metres, but 10 metres beneath that, with seemingly no way to get to it from the surface, because it's either caved in or whatever, is another tunnel which is 456 metres long.
Lighting.
Not working, but yeah, it's both.
Door. You can walk down it.
Yeah, like you can get a car down it.
Right. Wow, a car.
Yeah. A lot of these are massive. You get a train in some of them. There's a grid of tunnels connected to that, which are 1,750 metres in length. Wow. That's 1.7 kilometres in a grid. A shaft going to the surface that's 50-ish metres in height. A separate tunnel that's about half a kilometre away, which is 45 metres further underground than the rest. Still not connected to the surface. That contains 2 dams and a hydraulic machine of unknown purpose. They think it might have been a pumping station. But they're underground, and they've only found them because they've been digging.
Could be hydroelectricity.
Could have been, yeah, could have been. And then you've got Vlodaj, or Wolfsburg. 4 access tunnels that are bored into the mountainside. And they were going through drill bits and explosives like you wouldn't get your breath, because it's solid mountain. They're blowing holes in the mountain. There's an enormous grid of tunnels, 12 metres from floor to ceiling, and 3.1 kilometres in total length, in rock. So you can imagine how long that must have taken. Imagine the noise. Living in a nearby village, I know there's a war on, but you live in the mountains, hunt deer for a living, and all of a sudden, hell of a racket from the neighbours. Some of the areas underground there are flooded, but you can actually get in on by boat. They've flooded that much, yeah, you can use a boat to get in. Next you've got Sokolec, which is one of the bigger ones, Falkenberg. 2 tunnels, both partially collapsed. 2 separate tunnels, 600 metres away from that, and they're 60 metres underground. 2 underground structures on 2 different levels. Just over a kilometre in total length. Then you've got Rojecka, which is Dorfbach. 3 access tunnels in the base of the mountain. 3 large underground halls, which are 10 metres in height, plus a guard room, 500 metres in length. Then there's Julkowice, or Auersdorf, the Germans called it. 2 access tunnels and 5 incomplete tunnels. They're all parallel to each other. So they think it might have been a train yard, or a freight yard maybe, which would have access tunnels for resupplying trains. 460 metres in length in total. And then you've got Giatz Castle, or Fürstenstein, and these were excavations made under the castle there. There's a Polish castle. It was seized in 1941 by the Nazis, used as a headquarters. 2 tunnels that go underground that lead from under the mountains up into the castle's cellars. So they dug from the cellars downwards beneath the mountains to make an access tunnel. Very Castle Wolfenstein, all that stuff. Then there's an elevator shaft that is hidden under the courtyard. There's some sort of stone mosaic that you can lift, and there's an elevator.
Oh, busy, weren't they?
Yeah. And a hidden entrance in the castle gardens, a bit like the labyrinthy sort of thing. There's just rocks, walls, and brick walls and stuff, stone walls, and then in there there's a underground access, like a cellar door. Yeah. And a further site. So this has been about 8 now. That's the 7 that I've discovered. The 8th one, which is referred to only in the vaguest terms, is called the Great Owl.
It's vague.
The site has not been found, but they know it exists because of the documentation that exists. Its size, purpose, contents, and location are entirely unknown.
So how long did you spend here at this place?
0 hours, 0 minutes.
You didn't take any of the pictures for the episode?
No.
Even when you were in Poland?
I was in Poland in 2009.
Right.
War Mysteries began in 2018. So that is the extent of Riese, basically. 7 different sites.
And that's all kind of contained in one
No,
area?
it's spread right across the mountains.
Okay. So the mystery, I'm guessing, is...
What's it for?
Yeah, what's it for?
Alright, so... 3 different theories abound about what Riese could have been all about. We will start with the first theory, which is perhaps the most obvious, in that it may have been an armaments factory. Riese was constructed far from the western and eastern fronts, roughly central in the regions held by the Third Reich, and impervious to almost all forms of attack. At a time when German industry was being battered into dust by Allied bombing, particularly in the Dusseldorf and Hamburg regions, an underground factory would have made perfect sense. Indeed, Mittelwerk, the production facility responsible for V1 and V2 weapons, among others, had been specifically designed and constructed to take advantage of this very philosophy. A particularly noteworthy case in support of this theory comes from the archives of Majet, the company responsible for production facilities required for the MG42 machine gun. Sensing that their factory facilities in Berlin may be in danger, they applied for dispensation to move their factory facilities to the east. This occurred less than 3 months later. The Krupp Steelworks in Essen were also a high-value target for the Allied bombing campaign, and the German High Command was well aware of the need to protect it, to the extent that a decoy site was constructed of full-scale building shells to divert airstrikes away from the actual production facilities. Eventually, a great deal of German armaments production would be gradually shifted further to the east as the Allies advanced. The larger complexes at Riese, those being Orsovka and Vlodars, with 12-metre-tall ceilings, multiple halls, air ducting, elevator shafts and narrow-gauge railway lines, were constructed in a way that they could have been used as production facilities of some kind. The layout and positioning of some chambers does appear to mirror those used in certain German military-industrial factories and armament production sites of the same era. So they built entire dummy factories, complete with chimney stacks and everything, and they'd just burn pallets.
What, they make them out of cardboard?
No, just wood. They'd paint, because obviously metal was a valuable commodity during the war. Sensing what was going on, obviously the need to secure air superiority over the region. In the early days of the war, that wasn't a problem, but later, as it went on, sort of 1943 onwards, we gradually began to get further and further into German airspace.
Pounding them.
Yeah, especially with Big Week, when we sent, hundreds and hundreds of bombers over. They knew that their production facilities were going to be at risk, so they had to start thinking pragmatically, really, and that's obviously one of the main driving forces behind the idea that it might have been an armaments factory.
Well, yeah, they started building that, didn't they?
Yeah, but the thing is, it's happened with others. So the Krupp factory, the Majet factory, they moved them. I mean, even the aircraft facilities were moved at one point. They started stationing airfields closer to the front, but they'd moved the production facilities further away. Mittelwerk was one of them. The layout and positioning of some chambers does appear to mirror those of German military industrial factories and armament production sites. But then that's not a huge surprise because, again, it's Germany. You know what they're like. If they build something and it works, then that becomes sacrosanct.
I know what they're like, mate. Yeah, I know
That's what they're like. So, armaments factory. I mean, there's no evidence really of any, ball bearing systems. I mean, there's no presses, nothing like that. No
it can't have all been an armaments factory. I think it had more multi-use.
Multi-use. Yeah, maybe.
Facilities.
Yeah. The two that it mentioned, Orsovka and Vlodars, they had the big ceilings. They were probably the most likely, if that's what they're going to use them for, because they've got the airspace. I mean, you need a certain amount of clearance for fumes and for air ducting and for air circulation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think it was
overhead gantries and that kind of stuff.
Like a base, a massive base.
Maybe. Anyway, the next theory then, which ties more into Hitler and high command than it does to anything else, is that it might have been a command HQ. The Wolf's Lair, known as Wolfschanze, was constructed deep in the forest of Gielotz, in Masuria, northeastern Poland, in 1940. This was relatively close to the Eastern Front, and positioned as such because Hitler had planned to defeat the Soviet military in just a few months. The massive complex spread across 200 buildings, many of which were fortified bunkers with walls 2 meters thick. Naturally, when German victory didn't immediately come to pass, it would have made good strategic sense to consider a secondary location. Wolfschanze was indeed heavily defended. Post-war, it took more than a decade to clear the 54,000 landmines laid around it. But nonetheless, it was not impervious to attack should the eastern frontier fall to the Soviets. While not explicitly referenced as such in any military documentary form, Riese appears a very likely candidate for such a replacement fortress. Albert Speer, the chief architect of the Third Reich and Minister of Armaments, even hinted at this after the war in his memoirs. Hitler himself, wherever he went, first of all issued orders for building bunkers for his personal protection. The thickness of their roofs increased with the caliber of the bombs until it reached 16 feet and a half. Ultimately, there were veritable systems of bunkers, and in 1944, he had 2 underground headquarters blasted into the mountains in Silesia and Thuringia, the project tying up hundreds of indispensable mining specialists and thousands of workmen. Referring to the Giant as one of the many bunkers, Speer went on to add, according to my memorandum of September 22nd, 1944, some 150 million marks had been spent on the bunker complex called the Giant near Bad Charlottenbrunn. Overall, this theory highlights the extreme remote location of Riese and the pace at which the project advanced, coupled with the sheer level of construction activity and financing poured into its development over and above other vital industries, as indicators of its overall importance to high command and the Führer. However, this same argument could be made for any of the theories outlined. The thinning resources of the Third Reich were just beginning to make themselves known in mid-1943, and amongst fierce competition, the division of resources generally fell to the Führer himself, which naturally leaves much room for additional speculation. So that's from his memoirs. And he mentions, obviously, Silesia. Mm-hmm. Thuringia is another issue. That's another
episode.
That's another site, another episode. But Silesia is the important bit. He mentions specifically the region. And the only thing of strategic value in the region, other than the forest, is the mountain range, which is where they were building Riese. 150 million marks was not small change during the war.
A lot of money.
I mean, they spent far more than that.
What is that today?
In 1942... which is the latest they had reliable statistics for, 2.5 Reichsmarks was worth $1.
Okay.
So 150 million Reichsmarks is $60 million.
Dollars.
60 million US dollars in 2020 money, so 4 years ago, accounting for inflation, is $1,028,056,666.67. So they spent $1 billion on this project, roughly.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. But if you consider that only 11% of it was reinforced, they had a lot more to spend.
Yeah.
to get this place to finish their underground city. So you can see how important it might have been to High Command then. They were pumping that kind of cash into it, especially when they're getting their asses handed to them on both fronts. So without knowing quite the importance that was placed on it specifically, we can't really tell if it was ever going to be another Wolf's Lair or not. But if he had 16 and something feet thick ceilings, it would make sense to think, well, we're wasting concrete here. Why don't we just dig into those mountains over there? So our final theory, and perhaps one with a bit more clout behind it, is that it was going to be used for clandestine operations. Finally, and perhaps most infamously, Riese has been suggested as a site for any and all classified projects, hidden treasure, and experimental research and development by the Waffenamt Army Weapons Division. A supplementary development facility for Mittelwerk, and a further replacement for Peenemünde, does seem to have made good logistical sense, especially so after Operation Hydra in August of 1943. In the case of the V2 weapon, for example, it had been given absolute top priority by Hitler himself on July 7th, 1943, and uninterrupted production of the weapon was desired. After Operation Crossbow targeted the launch sites of Reservelager West, Beverhaven 21 and the Botten Tower facility on the Normandy coast, V2 launches were rapidly switched to mobile platforms, Meilewagen, showing the Allies that the launch sites were limited value targets. As a consequence, the German military was conscious of the fact that there would likely be an increase in attacks at the source, the weapon production facilities themselves. Additionally, fighter aircraft had been given very high priority, particularly toward the end of the war when bombing raids were prolific. Underground facilities were known to be used for production of airframes, and most especially for the emergency fighter program aircraft. Setting aside the more pragmatic applications of an underground facility of this size, there is the other aspect of this theory: rumours of special projects or secretive storage facilities. There is some testimonial evidence of this, mostly coming from eyewitnesses living in the area after the war, and from the stories passed on to descendants near the Al Mountains. Here are some of the testimonies. There were rumours in town of German-speaking individuals, spotted just occasionally throughout the mountains after the war. Local communities often mention these strangers, who called each other guardians, showing up in villages after World War II, buying up seemingly worthless remote real estate and living in isolation. Those individuals were supposedly watching over hidden shafts, entrances, and other parts of the complex. There are many stories about explorers interrupted by strangers during delves into the various tunnels, of campsites being disturbed, or of walkers being followed through the forests. It's no secret that there were many German or German-related companies situated around the Al Mountains. A friend of mine once told me that when he was out excavating, at that moment, two men came out of the forest, completely out of nowhere, and they followed him. He saw them several times. He said that they were not native Poles, but they must have been there for some reason. A few years ago, a tourist was found on the slopes of the Lodars with a hole in his head. The hole had a regular oval. It came from a small caliber bullet. There was no motive for the crime and no witnesses. So these guys...
Okay, guarding.
Essentially, yeah, mainly German in background. Some Austrian. Moved into the area as a single man or whatever. Buying up, say, a couple of square acres of land, which obviously they know specifically contains, say, a tunnel entrance or an air shaft or something like that, which they know is related to Riese. And then going and living on that land in isolation and essentially guarding the area, making sure no one finds it. People that were children then that are adults now obviously have said that they'd go out walking their dog with their dad, for example, and they would be followed by an old man through the woods. Another one says, it is no secret that there were also many German or German-related companies situated around the Owl Mountains that still exist to this day. And that's actually true, I've had a look on the map. So there's lots of German industry in the area, and there was then as well, presumably for the same reasons. A tourist was found on the slopes of the Vlodars with a hole in his head. It came from a small caliber bullet. There was no motive for the crime and no witnesses.
Okay.
Which is kind of spooky, really, if you're sort of out walking your dog and some sort of half-baked, half-crazed Nazi fanatic comes out of the wood with his death's head cap on and just pops you in the forehead.
It's not going to happen around here, though, is it?
The only structure of debatable origin is known as the henge, or the flytrap, which is located above ground near Milkov, approximately 2.5 miles southeast of Sokolech. It is a dodecagonal concrete frame, most likely the base of a cooling tower, but is alleged to be a supporting frame for an experimental repulsine flying disc, or a housing for anti-gravity research associated with the mythical Die Glocke. Given the ultra-remote location, the secretive nature of the complex, and the rapid development of logistical infrastructure, this could indeed make Riese an excellent candidate for a weapons development centre, a hidden cache, or the headquarters for a special projects division, away from the prying eyes of the world. Quite why it would be allegedly watched over so closely after the war is not clear. The henge, or sometimes called the flytrap, most likely the base of a cooling tower, but it is alleged to also have been a supporting frame for an experimental repulsine flying disc, or the housing for an anti-gravity research device associated with the mythical Die Glocke, the Nazi bell.
The bell.
Yeah. Unlikely, but the repulsine suggestion does have some merit because it needs airflow from beneath, like a turbojet, in order to generate lift. And there was a French guy that actually invented a repulsine, which is where the name comes from.
Really?
Yeah, we talked about it in the Foo Fighters episode. That one. So that's it. Was it an armaments factory? Could it have been the next wolf's lair, or was it used for some sort of other clandestine purpose? But that's the whole point. Obviously, it's so big, it's so gargantuan that there's no way to know. A lot of the documentation for it, other than the invoices and things that are trackable through businesses for sales of goods and things, the actual documents pertaining to the site itself and whatever it was going to be have all been destroyed. And that was done at the end of the war, so it was done on purpose to obscure its nature. I guess, given that a lot of the detachments from the SS that still survived after the war wanted to go and fight a guerrilla war in the mountains, it could have been these mountains they were referring to. Perhaps they were going to go and hole up in Riese. Whatever it was going to be, the amount of money that was spent on it, the amount of manpower that was thrown into it. Like I say, there was a labour camp near to one of these facilities with mainly captured Soviets, but there were thousands of people involved. And they've found mass graves as well nearby.
You get all the prisoners of war to build it and then kill them. and get more
working
to
to
build more and kill more.
But I mean, from what surviving documentation tells us, which is not much, it's mentioned that the overall kind of scale of the place was expected to be similar to a city in the end. So it would have, residential district. It would have production facilities of a kind. Whether that's for food to support the population or if it's for armament or whatever, it's not clear. But it was nearby to towns. There were supply routes. They built their own railway. They even built roads down there. There's paved roads in some of these. Not much. But enough to hint at what they were potentially planning to do with it.
Wow.
But no one really knows. They're still looking into the place. But obviously, while you've got tourists getting shot in the head by weirdos on the mountain and guys living in shacks. I mean, this is all from the 80s and 90s. Really, they'd be dead by now, wouldn't they? So, what do you reckon?
I think it was like a command centre. I think that was the... Excuse me. I think it was like a command centre.
Yeah.
Yeah. A big... Going to do everything, make planes and armament factories and...
Like a last stand kind of thing.
Well, yeah, or just preparation for world domination.
Yeah, could be.
Could be. Take over the world.
Yeah. I mean, for all we know, it could just be hide and seek that got out of hand. Let's finish this up.
You're going legacy now.
Let's do it.
So, legacy.
What? You can't just say the word. You got to. The Riese facility, whatever its intended purpose, was gargantuan. Over 150 million Reichsmarks were spent on the initial stages of construction, and the project consumed more concrete than the entirety that Germany had at its disposal for air raid shelters in 1944. It spanned over 18 miles of the Au Mountains at its widest point, and more than 5 miles of tunnels had been dug out of the extremely dense mountainsides. With the Allies approaching in the west and the Soviets approaching in the east, the central location of Riese makes excellent sense from a tactical perspective. Toward the end of 1944, Werwolf units were established. These were small groups of organised guerrilla fighters loyal to the Nazi Party, who were ordered to bury weapon caches and train for defensive strike operations, similar to the holdouts left over in the Pacific for decades after the Japanese surrender. After the fall of Berlin, these guerrilla units were rumoured to be holed up in Lower Silesia and the Bavarian area after the surrender of Germany, and could explain the presence of German natives in the area in the following years. Most of these units dissolved within days of war's end, however. The more outlandish theories of gravity-defying flying discs, space weapons, experimentation into time travel, and secretive technology research are generally regarded as curiosities rather than serious avenues of investigation. But the prospect of a reinforced underground bunker system, bristling with anti-aircraft and anti-infantry defences, is not quite so difficult to envisage. Given the vast scope of the facility and the carefully chosen location in the surrounding terrain, an entrenched enemy would have been extraordinarily difficult to extract. Ultimately, Riese is an enigma. More than 5,000 forced workers perished during its construction, and documentation related to the structure itself was feverishly destroyed towards the end of April of 1945, taking with it the true nature of the project. The outcome of the Second World War is generally agreed to have been inevitable once Hitler had failed to take Moscow in 1941. But the course of the later 1940s might just have been dramatically different had this vast underground city reached its final completion.
It's a big one then.
Yeah. So still there now. Still there now. You can actually visit it. They do tours. It's quite remote, obviously. It's in a mountain range. It's a good 2-hour drive from most major cities. But you can visit. You can see the henge, the fly trap, the big concrete dodecahedron. You can go down into, I think, 5 different sites there. They've obviously got power down there again now, so you can see where you're going. Some of the tour guides are really quite knowledgeable. A couple of them, I think, were descendants of people that either discovered the place or were stationed there after the war.
Unlike that bimbo on the submarine, you mean?
What? But there you go. Essentially, an enormous, or at least the beginnings of an enormous underground city, which, had it not been pinpointed, might have lied there undiscovered up until today. Obviously, people like to explore, but no one knows what it was going to be used for. Yeah, a lot of concrete for essentially just a big cupboard under the mountains. Wowza! Giant underground city, or thereabouts. Be amazing for hide and seek. Perhaps not then, because when they had guns, didn't they? But nowadays. So there we go. Let us know what you think. Obviously, let us know down below if you've got any theories of your own.
If any of our viewers know anything about it or know more about it than he does, write in.
Where?
To our address.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the comments.
He probably will. So thank you for watching. It's great to have you back. There is another episode on the way. Beyond this one, of course. We're going to be finishing out Series 4 at the very least. So stick with us for those.
We're going to try and do the next one
quicker than
9 months ago.
9 months, yeah. We just a little bit faster this time. Chin me up!
I've had a additional microphone for this episode.
Yeah, I know you have.
So that my voice would be clearer.
That's not switched on.
It is.
It isn't, look.
They don't know that.
Should we... Oh, okay. Thank God it isn't on.
Sexton!
Obey the bell.
I had a boner right at the beginning.
Wow, that's... Jesus Christ.